Good evening and welcome, everyone. We're here at the Missoula Art Museum with Eric Carlson, the featured artist for tonight, and Associate Curator John Kalsbeek. I'm Brandon Reintjes, the Senior Curator, and we're celebrating Eric Carlson's Entanglements, his new exhibition at the Missoula Art Museum. We're going to give it a few minutes just to see if we gain a few more people. We have people joining all the time, and I'm just going to pause and wait till about 6:02. So thanks for your patience. That's great. Thank you, everybody, for waiting. It's always, we always just give the benefit of the doubt for people who are joining or need a few extra minutes. So we're glad to have you. A couple of you are testing out the question and answer functions and the chat functions, and we're intending tonight to be conversational. And so please go ahead and submit any questions you have or comments that you'd like to make. What we're going to do is we're going to pepper Eric with a few questions just to get the ball rolling, and we'll bring up the questions as possible as we're moving through. We'll see them on screen and we'll fit them in. As you know, the Missoula Art Museum is a museum dedicated to contemporary art, and as such, we've got wonderful focuses both in our exhibitions program and in our collection. We like to really support artists who are making work right now, living in our communities, creating, and Eric certainly fits that category. We also preserve the history of Montana modernism in the state, and then we pay special attention to artwork made by contemporary Native artists. And you can see this piece behind me here is by Neil Parsons, who's Blackfeet. And we're situated on the traditional and ancestral territories of the Salish and Upper Kalispel or Pend d'Oreille people, and are committed to really respecting the land and the indigenous stewards of that land. And we find that their work is fundamental to the work that we do here at MAM and the artistic life in Montana. And as such, we have a focus in the permanent collection on contemporary Native art, and we have a dedicated gallery in the Frost Gallery that's just adjacent to Eric's show. Eric's work, Entanglements, is an all new body of work, and we're really excited to present it here at MAM. He's been very patient and very generous with us, dealing with COVID and all the obstacles that have come about because of that. And Eric, as many of you know, is an archaeologist, an illustrator, an archaeological illustrator, and an artist living here in our midst, but also splitting his time between a variety of locales like Alaska, Hawaii. You never quite know where he's going to be when you get your next email from him, but it's wonderful to have him in our community and in creating. So everybody, let's welcome Eric. And our other conversant is John Kalsbeek, who's the associate curator here at MAM, and he was one of the organizing factors behind this exhibition. And really, we've enjoyed our conversations together between the three of us during studio visits and installing the show. And we just thought that this would be a great way to start, and a wonderful way to introduce the exhibition to you. Eric is actually sitting in the exhibition. You can see his Missoula Airport piece directly behind him, but we also have this slideshow, and as we go on, we'll refer to different pieces that are in the exhibition and pull them up on screen here for you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. Eric, I wondered if you could just start by describing your artistic practice. What's a day in the studio look like?
Well, first off, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about my art. This is a great pleasure, and thanks for the exhibition. The work that I do, the art that I produce, begins outside of the studio. It's always out usually in the wilderness, in a wilderness setting, where I engage or interact with animals, with creatures that kind of come upon me, and I witness events out there in the natural setting, events that I think are meaningful in some way. An interaction of birds, a crow cawing at an owl, or something as simple as a chickadee kind of dropping out of the sky and landing on a blade of grass. But these things, these events that I kind of engage in or witness, I'll see them and I'll basically run to find a sketch pad, and I'll try to remember the scene and sketch out what I see and kind of create a small composition of those events. And often the event isn't stuck in time. It's not a moment, but it is often a duration, like maybe 5 minutes of that interaction between different animals. And I'll sketch out that composition really quickly. And then over the course of maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I'll continue to think about that event and continue to add to the sketch and the composition. And I don't know, kind of think deeply about what it is that I witnessed, and try to find meaning in it, and try to interweave that experience with some of the things that are going on in my own life, things that I'm reading, discussions that I'm having with friends, and things like that. The composition starts to form itself after a couple weeks, and it's that time that I go into the studio, and then, if I think I have something important, I'll start sketching up on a larger sheet of paper in a more formalized style, and proceed from there.
One of the things that I thought was striking was this is very different than the work that we've seen you do previously, and you've approached this series and this body of work in an entirely new way. Can you tell us about that? That's
true. It's this new body of work is a lot more fluid, a lot more spontaneous, and a lot thicker, I think. There's more basically stratigraphy that's built up in these paintings than there was in the past. In the past, the paintings I was doing were more formalized. They were on canvases, and the image was mostly created on paper prior to it being basically transferred up onto the canvas. This body of work is much different. I'm drawing directly on the fairly thick paper, and the image isn't complete when I start drawing on this formalized paper. It's maybe half done, and as I draw, the image starts to come alive, and it starts to kind of respond back and talk back to me. And I think in that way, the images are much more alive and they're much more active than those previous pieces, where a lot of the work I'm doing in this show is very little brushwork. Most everything I do is hand painted onto the paper or wiped on with rags and things like that. So it's, I don't know, they're almost, I kind of think of these as cave paintings in a strange way. So the brushwork I do is towards the end, and it's just a fine bristled brush. Yeah, and that's just basically the last layer of these many layers that you see in these paintings.
I go back to what you said in your intro, Eric. It's, as Brandon said, it's always so fun to talk to you. Right now, just listening to you, I mean, we've had numerous conversations, and kind of every time we talk, new things strike me. One of them is, and I think all the people with us this evening will see, like, just listening to you talk, I think what comes through in your work is the honesty of your ideas.
Yeah.
And I know it's kind of, it's not kind of, it's a major part of the work itself, which is kind of hard to explain or think about until you hear you talk about it a little bit. But in your opening statement, when you said, you're a witness to events, I think that's really great. But then you called them meaningful events, and you referenced a chickadee landing on a blade of grass or a raven calling while you're in the woods. And I think any of us can find meaningfulness in those moments when we're in the wild. I mean, some of your images of the your grizzly bear encounters and those, I mean, obviously those are moments that you're never going to forget, right? But I mean, hearing a raven call, what is the meaningfulness to you personally? Like, what is it that strikes you as something important or meaningful in that moment?
Yeah, I often don't exactly know in the moment, but right. But it affects me in a certain way, and I'm attentive to it. And like the scene with the crow and the owl up in the cottonwood tree in a little Missoula neighborhood here, it made me stop and it made me watch for some reason. And I was under the tree for maybe 10 minutes watching that interaction between the two birds, and it stuck with me. And and so after doing, going back and doing some sketches of that and just remembering that incident and recalling it day after day after day over the course of 5 or 6 days, meaning starts to form, basically. It's not me imposing meaning on it. The event itself has meaning and speaks to me basically by me keeping it in my mind and keeping it, I don't know, just keeping it at the forefront of my mind. And so that as the days go on after an incident like that, I look or am aware of other things that are happening that may link to that particular incident of the crow and the owl, for instance. And then everything starts to get packaged and interwoven. But it just takes attention, I think. And if you think about these images before you go to sleep, you often dream about them. And other parts of your subconscious basically start to add to the meaning of an incident like that. So I think
that's really interesting, because you bring up a couple different divergent points when I hear you say those things. I mean, you're obviously a really observant person, but beyond that, I think when you talk about, and this came across the first time we talked, is that how the pieces themselves are about present moments and about being present. They're not snapshots, they're ongoing moments. And I've thought about that a lot, and that reminds me of our shared, and another thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately, I guess, over the course of not just the COVID year, but in general, is shared experience, human experience. It's all shared. I mean, we've experienced that, or we've got to know that, I think, a little bit more. But see, now my brain is going to go off on all these divergent ideas that you bring up. But with you being an observer, I think is, you know, maybe you became an architect because of that's your natural way, or maybe that, you know, that goes back and forth. But then for you to say you think about this one moment for days and days, I think that's really interesting that those little moments stick with you. But meanwhile, as you're still going out through your days, all of these little moments, you're observing all these things, and they really, you know, they really come into you. I guess I'm just making another observation, but I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're not passive about it. So I think it's funny that we talk about you as an observer, and that sounds like a passive thing. And it also, you know, you filter things through remembering, through memory. And that also sounds like it's not an active state, but I find your work to be very present and very active.
Yeah, I don't mean it. I don't mean it as passive at all. I think that, I mean, I've been an observer my whole life. Also, you know, if I'm in a room with people I don't know, I'm not the one talking, you know, but I'm observing, and that's not passive at all. I don't think you're being passive.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting. We can go back to archaeology a little bit, because that profession, it trains you to be observant. And much of the work that we do in the field as archaeologists is in very remote areas, very places way off trail. And once you step off of that trail and you start bushwhacking, your mind changes immensely, because you become hyper aware of every step that you take. You're making the decisions on what route you're making through the brush, over fallen logs, things like that. And especially in Montana and Alaska, there are wild creatures out there that you need to kind of be alert and listen for out there. So your sensitivity just is at a higher level, and it allows you to remember things better, to see things more clearly, and it all benefits the art in the end.
Eric, we had a question from Lenore about the size of the work, and I think it's interesting that you use the consistent format when approaching each of these pieces. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. All the pieces are a standard size sheet of Stonehenge printmaking paper. They're 50 inches by 38 inches, sometimes oriented horizontal, sometimes vertical. I moved to the paper from the canvases because they're easy to transport. I like the texture of the paper better than the canvases. It's cheaper. It seems more organic. It's easier to work with.
Yeah, and something about having everything the same size. I think your imagery is so riotous. And so one of the things that we talked about in the show was not necessarily having a single focal point in any of the pieces.
Right.
And something about having that consistent size of the sheet of paper, I think, is important. But also what you talked about before, that direct engagement with the work, either with your hand or a rag, but then also that the pieces are engaging the wall directly. The framing here, they're hung like scrolls from a strip of wood, and that might be maybe not apparent to anybody on Zoom, but when you walk in the gallery, the presence of those pieces is really very particular because of the way that they're hung and installed.
And to specifically answer Lenore, what is the size? They're about 40 by 60 inches. Is that the paper size?
Yeah, 50 inches by 38.
50 by
That's really great.
But I think that the size is important in order to honor the animals that are depicted in them. Anything, if it worked smaller than this, things would get lost. But I think the size of the the birds and the other creatures in these paintings is often much bigger than life, and it calls out attention to them. Yeah, especially
Yeah, the chickadees.
The chickadees are huge.
yeah. The size of a dog.
I never thought I'd say that sentence.
So Eric, why don't you, because we talked about it when we were, in curatorial stages about the actual stories that go with them, and you were not reluctant, but unsure whether, that would be part of it, and you kind of felt like maybe you didn't want to give anything away. When Brandon and myself, I feel personally strongly that the basic nature of the story helps inform the, that really universal, like I said, honest idea that is in the piece. The one that I liked the most was the beaver carcass in the river when when that decision came to you, and I thought, see, like everybody experiences something like that, and it stuck with you. Yeah.
That's a good point, John. I guess in the back of my mind, I always thought that these images, I wanted to keep them mysterious so that the viewer could come up with their own narrative. They could make their own story out of them. But I think you're right. I think that telling my story, my inspiration for these pieces, is important. And I
Will
think
you share that story about this piece right now?
Yeah.
For everybody?
So the beavers. This is actually just one beaver, and it was a couple summers ago. I was along the bank of the Middle Fork of the Flathead River in West Glacier up in northern Montana. And I was just sitting on the riverbank thinking about a decision that I had to make, a big life decision, a big change. And I noticed a beaver swimming underwater directly beneath me. And I looked down. It was about, maybe 4 feet under the water, and its belly was scraping against the bottom of the river. It was swimming upstream. And as I watched it swim, it dropped one of its feet and touched the ground, touched the rock on the bottom of the river, and pushed itself forward, and gave itself just a little bit of an extra push forward up against that current. And I saw that as a sign in the decision that I had to make, that I guess I had to be a little bit stronger in my actions, I guess, and take some incentive on my own and not just let things happen to me, but to, actively propel myself forward.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
With the way that you're depicting this beaver in multiple states, we talk about durational time with depicting the same animal from different standpoints and at different intervals. Somebody observed that there's often numerous eyes on the animals, or depicted with the animals, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, the eyes are really important in this body of work. It's the first time I've started working with these multiple eyes, but I really like the effect. And what they represent is movement. And with this bear in particular, agitation, the flickering of eyes, the blinking of eyes of a bear in a nervous situation. It also signifies the head moving just a little bit, kind of twitching back and forth or up and down over the course of a few seconds or a minute. I don't know, it just creates energy when you look into those eyes. But then I also have anchor points around those flickering eyes, so that if it's too hard to look at, you could look at the nostrils. It kind of anchors your attention for a moment, and then you can look away from those more dominant circles and back into the chaos or the riotousness of the rest of the composition.
Yeah, and thinking about the story with the beaver too, some of the things Todd recognizes that your work often has anthropomorphic aspects to it. And how do you decide to incorporate that aspect into your work? When is the story about the animal, and when is the story about you interacting with the animal? And then also that idea of entanglement, when is the subjectivity go back and forth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how to answer it. The chickadee piece is one of my latest ones, as was the crow, the yellow piece that you just showed there, the crow and the owl. The later pieces that I've done have no human component, have no, they're just the pure animal or the pure bird. And like my earlier art was very human dominated with animal elements and bird elements that would kind of intrude. Human would be transforming into an animal or a bird and then becoming human again. But as I've aged, I guess, as I've progressed, especially with this body of work, the human component has begun to disappear. The earlier pieces in this show, the humans are there as kind of spirit elements. She's a little different, but the other pieces, there's.
I was thinking of the winged with the human legs coming down in.
Oh, in the bear.
Yeah, and also in a couple other pieces.
Yeah.
You can see little bits of humanity, human form poking out.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, a lot of the intention behind that too is again this idea of entanglements, is the human cultures, human evolution. We are completely linked to animals and birds around us. It's only since the Neolithic Revolution that we've started to diverge away from our closeness with animals in the wild, and through that long history of codependency or cohabitation, we as humans have acquired animal movements, animal behaviors. We've evolved biologically with them, and they are basically incorporated within us. Our ancestors, we've consumed these animals and birds for 200,000 years, and the flesh of these animals are woven into our flesh. So there's really no separation between these animals and birds and humans in how I think of things anyway.
Yeah, this is the one I was thinking of with the almost like little harpies flocking around.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good piece there. That one. Yeah.
Yeah, this one too also has the wolf that reappears in almost all of the paintings in this show. You can see on the wolf form is it's just kind of it's embodied inside of that bird.
What does the wolf represent for you? Why is he ever present, or she?
Yeah, the wolf is kind of a symbol of just pure energy that intrudes into the living forms of a lot of these creatures, provides life and constant movement. It's almost like just a spirit of life. Just doesn't stop panting and moving, and it's passionate.
I think you said at one point, if you look carefully, there's a wolf almost in every piece, kind of hidden or tucked away.
Yeah, that's true. in the chickadee piece, the heart of the chickadee is a cluster of wolves.
That's wild.
Yeah. So.
This is one of those pieces where the entanglement between hunter and prey and human and animal, I really think it comes out, the whole thesis of the show gets shown here quite well.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a scene from Glacier National Park. It was inspired by a couple friends and I were skiing a couple winters back, and we were following a pack of wolves up into Bowman Lake. We never saw the wolves, but we saw their tracks, and we saw bits and pieces of a deer that they were eating on, bloodstains, snow, and all of that. And then a year later, I was up in Avalanche Lake, and it was springtime, and the lilies were starting to bloom. And I just thought about that deer from the previous winter and the decomposition of that blood and the remnants of the flesh and the fur kind of seeping into the forest and just becoming nutrients for the new growth of the springtime. And so in this scene, you have the lilies and you have Devil's Club there in the background as well, being nourished, growing out of this scene of wolf and deer.
Yeah, it's a wonderful piece. It's new, or what? It's sort of near the end of this series, I think, right? There's that decorative element. The lilies, you know, that repetition, I think, is really wonderful.
Yeah, I think,
decorative,
John,
not being a bad word.
Cool. Yeah, I think you like the blue in this one too, and I like that blue. It's kind of the I don't know, the top stratigraphic layer that
Yeah.
kind of lightens up an otherwise pretty dark scene.
There's a question from Sarah Scott, asked about if you could elaborate on your airport piece behind you. She pointed out specifically that the animals are large and the humans are tiny and nondescript.
Yeah. Well, this goes back to this weird idea of entanglements and these intersections, basically, of animals' lives and people's lives. And I've always been struck with these taxidermied scenes at the airport, because these animals all came from completely different regions, including the mountain goat and the mountain lion. I'm sure they were on hundreds of miles away. They existed, but somehow their lives have now become entangled, even in death. At the Missoula airport, they've been resculpted into these strange taxidermied scenes forever, and anyway, it's just an interesting thing to think about, these animals' lives and their afterlives and what they think about the taxidermist who positioned them in these kind of eternal embraces. But there's also, I like this. I like the idea too of just this community, of Missoula defining itself through these wild animals, and of all the things that they could choose to put in the airport to introduce visitors to this town, to let them know who Missoulians are. They've chosen this basically collection of animals to define.
Don't forget the Alaskan brown bear also.
Exactly, yeah. And there's the big bear in in that glass case.
Yeah, from Alaska.
So, but anyways, in the like in the pronghorn chests here, you're seeing them kind of come back to life a little bit. So I feel like in this piece, I'm giving them these animals attention, giving them a little bit of life and movement, even in their death. And it's nice to emphasize the animals and de-emphasize the humans down below that are just collecting their luggage and are usually unaware of all the things that are happening around them.
When I looked at it, I kind of thought about because at that very spot, I mean, that is all up above the luggage, right? So it's almost
Right.
like your perspective here is up above, looking down on this, mundane human chaos,
Exactly.
which is, gathering your luggage is always such a, everybody's, and then
Yeah.
there's this big gruesome, action scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
That
is the one that
those are-
reminds me of cave painting and pictographs the most. And I don't know if it's the size, it's almost like a mural. You can see it right behind you in the view here, where you relate to it bodily. But I think also something about the way that you shift scale between pronghorns that are minute and larger pronghorns, and just kind of spread everything out. Something about the overlapping imagery I really feel like relates to that accumulation of marks that you find in some forms of pictographs. We've got an observation from Courtney that says, "I'm so happy to see you working on paper. When I saw the work, they almost felt like scrolls that you brought to the site and started making your marks as you responded to the environment. Really much like cave paintings. Amazing body of work. And what a lovely thing that you have your show at the same time as Nancy Erickson. I can't think of two artists better matched in some primal way."
I agree with that. I think our art is so similar. Yeah.
That's great. Eric, did you want to speak specifically about the one piece, this one here, or do you want to just continue scrolling through?
Oh no, we could talk about this one. Yeah, this one has been on my mind lately. The majority of pieces in this body of work are all animals and birds, all natural creatures entangled with one another. But I wanted to include this piece because these are human-made objects that are being entangled with a human individual. And it just kind of, our habitat that we live in every day is basically a habitat of objects. We've got so many hundreds of thousands of things on us and around us everywhere, and we often we're not aware of that. However, these objects define us. They make our lives easier. They make our lives burdensome. In this particular piece, this human individual has got a headdress of outboard motors. There's oars. These are all objects, actually technologies that allow people to move across bodies of water. So that's kind of the theme here of unmoored.
Yeah, that feeling of being underwater with him as he kind of navigates is such an eerie feeling. That's great.
So,
and you said something about the anchors, all the anchors weighing them down or holding them back. Everything with motion is in the top half. Every propellant is in the top half of the composition.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great. I think it's remarkable that this body of work developed really in just over a year, and that you took that challenge on yourself to create an entirely new series, and resulted in, aren't there 17 new pieces in the show?
That's right. And 4 more new ones that I've been working on since the show went up. So I've got the momentum is going. But yeah, a lot of caffeine. I listened to a lot of Metallica when these were being painted. And there was a pandemic that just agitated me and filled me full of nervous energy. So this all kind of came together at a good time, I think.
You want to talk a little bit, since we've got a little time, unless people have questions about work. I don't want to talk specifically about archaeology, but those connections that we talked about with your kind of that go with your style, your drawing style, and then some of the illustrations that you do when you have to illustrate objects from every viewpoint that you can, but kind of put it in one, and how you developed your style to do that sort of, you know, quasi-cubist way of looking at an object from all sides at once.
Sure, yeah.
I think it relates obviously to the way you do this with your animals and, you know, the multiple viewpoint.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, I started my art career basically as an archaeological illustrator, illustrating artifacts. And over doing that many years, I recognized that, you know, you don't draw an artifact as if it's a snapshot or a camera photo. You don't prop it up and and draw it from a distance. You hold artifacts and you keep them in motion as you illustrate them, because the purpose of the illustration is to learn about the object and to analyze it and interpret it, and with that knowledge, embed that knowledge into the illustration and try to convey it to the viewer. And so a lifetime of drawing things in motion and looking at, like a spear point, for example, from multiple viewpoints, and then compressing all of those viewpoints into a single unified image. You know, that practicing that all the time, it affects the way you see the world. And so now I have a hard time seeing things still, seeing things that aren't in motion. And so all of this work that in this show, it's all about motion. All the creatures in these paintings are moving. You see them moving around a composition as if they've been released or freed to roam around. The composition itself is dynamic and meant to move the viewer's eyes in you know, in a certain pathway, in a certain circular motion. Nothing is stuck in time. Everything is dynamic. Everything is moving. And yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I like that a lot. You said, I mean, it's like you're holding the object, you're looking at an artifact, the story of the artifact, you're almost here, you know, holding on to this story and examining it, from looking at it, thinking about it, you know, all the way around it, not just your single experience with it. You know, kind of going back to that idea of experience is a collective,
Right.
is a collective thing. It's not, you know, the human experience, the human condition, you know, you hear in artist statements and whatnot, but it's not one a human condition, it's ours, you know, everything is a shared experience. Everybody experiences the same thing, but you're holding on to this moment and looking at it from every side when drawing it. I think that's great.
Yeah, and again, an important component in all of this, in the artifact illustration and in these paintings, is clearly conveying that knowledge to the viewer, having the viewer in mind, not just keeping this to myself, or not caring if a viewer doesn't understand it. I want the viewer to understand it and to be able to decipher forms and all that. So
yeah.
So again, it's a
I
shared
think
experience.
it's great. I think that you're so clear with, you know, what you're doing, and so in every aspect of it, it's really, I just find it really it's amazing, you know. I mean, there are artists who make great things who don't know what they're doing, or, you know, doesn't matter. If anybody hasn't, you know, people who are watching, if you haven't come and seen the show, you really should come in and, you know, experience the pieces at full scale. Eric's around a lot. He'd be happy to talk to you. And I mean, seriously, you know, I think your ideas and your, not just ideas, but your reasons for these images are so clear. And so, you know, it comes through. It's wonderful.
Your studio is only a block and a half away. You can
Got you on speed dial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think maybe that experience as an illustrator and what you think your role is to the viewer, you know, your relationship to the viewer is very clear and very defined. And I think that's part of what makes the work so powerful. Yeah, it's great. If there's any other questions, we'll take those now. And the show is up for until May 22nd. So you still have time to come down to MAM. MAM is open. We do limit the number of folks in the galleries, and we encourage everybody to wear masks before they come inside. But we have been operating as a museum open to the public since June 4th. So we've been cautious and knock on wood, have been doing it responsibly. So we're just really pleased to be able to feature this amazing body of work and really hope that the community can enjoy it. It's great. We've got a couple of people just making some comments to you, which we'll share later.
Okay.
Not that they're inappropriate, just that they're, you know, directed at you, directed to you specifically.
All right.
I think the broad swath that you cut from Hawaii to Alaska to Glacier to Yellowstone to Missoula to the Rattlesnake, you know, is pretty impressive. Seeking these wild places out, no matter where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of scenes from wild Missoula over the last month as well. I'll show you those later.
That's great. And you said you're currently working on some illustration projects.
I am, yeah. I think there's 4 archaeological illustration projects I'm working on, reconstructing archaeological sites from Bronze Age in the United Arab Emirates, of all places, and then working on a bunch of caribou hunting scenes for Wrangell St. Elias National Park up in Alaska. So
that's fantastic. We did have one final question: if the works here are for sale, and yes, they are certainly. Please inquire at the front desk for a price list. You can contact Eric directly through his website, and get a hold of him to talk to the possibility of sales. But I think it's everything in the exhibition is available, correct?
that's right.
That's really great.
Somebody just commented on the translucency and opacity of the work. Can I talk about that for a second?
Please do.
Yeah, the painting style that I use is I'm just using really watered down acrylics. And so I'm just layering a translucent bit of paint down first, and then I just build on top of it. The paint layers accumulate. Often there's 12, 13 layers of fairly translucent paint that build up to form a single line in these. And so there is this this translucency, this thickness that develops, this stratigraphy basically that develops in these pieces that that I've kind of grown attached to. I kind of like the process of of painting in those light, translucent washes.
Yeah, and it really comes through in person, obviously, when you're, when you can really see the layers on the paper.
Yeah. The build up. I think that's one thing that people don't get from these virtual artist talks is the sense of the object in space, right? And the surface and the qualities there. So I do think that, boy, seeing things in person and experiencing the power of these works collectively is really important. And I hope people can make it down. Well, thanks so much, Eric. We really enjoy the exhibition, and thanks for sharing everything about your practice and the way that you approach making this work and some of the ideas behind Entanglement.
Sure. Well, thanks again for the opportunity to talk about my art. I don't often get a chance to do that. So, so thanks.
That's great. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and please stop by the Missoula Art Museum and come down and see the show.
Great. Thank you.
See you soon.
See ya.